G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you who are familiar with this channel may recall that it all began with the Mark I SunFoil. They all know that for my birthday in 2008, my son gave to me a 1-watt solar panel. It was a gallium arsenide solar panel, and it was sold with the idea that you could plug it into your car cigarette lighter, switch the accessories on, and it would prevent your battery from going flat if you weren't driving the car. However, it turned out that you couldn't stick this thing on the dashboard and let it charge through the window because it didn't make enough current to offset for the drain imposed by the accessory circuit. And so I decided there should be 5 1-watt panels in an omnidirectional array in a faceted aerofoil designed to be drag neutral at 90 kilometers per hour, because that's how slow I was cruising in an effort to reduce my fuel burn. Okay, so that thing there went up on the roof of the car in November, 29th of November 2008. And after a while, I convinced myself that it was such a good idea that my son permitted me to put a 20-watt panel onto his Subaru Brumby. So we had 2 Subarus with the same diameter wheels and the same gearbox and the same engine, not quite the same weight, but 4 different driving regimes. There was Daddy driving around up here on top of the mountain, and there was the young son who had one regime driving around in town, one regime driving around in Tamworth, and one regime involving going down the mountain between the 2 towns, and one regime involving coming up the mountain between the 2 towns. So we were able to get some pretty good comparative results. And then in, I don't know, August or so, in 2010, when Julia Gillard was elected Australia's Prime Minister as opposed to being appointed by the party room, the ancient venerable Mark I 5-watt SunFoil found itself replaced by the 30-watt third prototype. And this is the one with all the bells and the whistles. This is the one that's not only a faceted aerofoil, but it's also set up to blow its downwash onto the glass of the rear window and thus measurably reduce the aerodynamic drag of the car. And then, because you can't convince air to go over anything more than a 17-degree change in direction without help and assistance, this is the one with the ram scoop air inlets to suck in highway cruising air at 13.68 litres per second, injecting it onto the underside of the trailing edge, thereby using coander effect to suck the air over the pesky 45-degree chine on the facet. And of course, being an uncomputed mad scientist, I was spending a lot of money on photocopying, postage, sending out information packs, almost a newsletter in the old-fashioned Samizdat way. And my daughter said, when I was coming up to turn 50, she said, "Listen, old man, you make a 15-minute phone video and I'll put it on my YouTube channel." So she did that. And when it had 600 views, she got sick of answering questions. So she bookmarked Warbles on the Lot channel onto my phone. And she set me loose on the internoodle with no computer, but a YouTube channel. And the whole idea was to publicise the results of the SunFoil project, my little personal R&D effort into determining the effect of putting a streamlined solar panel onto a conventional road vehicle, because I had observed that it saved a bit of fuel. Not a huge amount of fuel, but about 1.5 litres a week when I had the 5-watt panel on the roof. My son saved about 4 litres a week when he had a 20-watt panel on the roof. And on this car, in this application, living where I live, the 30-watt panel saved about 5.3 litres a week. And I'd already sent information packages out to the Deputy Chancellor of the local university at Armidale, and they don't have an engineering faculty, so they couldn't help. I'd sent the stuff to my Member of Parliament federally in Tamworth, and he'd sent it to the Minister of Science, Industry, Innovation and Technology, who'd sent it to the CSIRO, who'd spent 5 months thinking about it and came back with the assessment that there is no bullshit in this idea. But they were trying to keep the Australian car manufacturing industry alive. The last thing they wanted to tell the punters is, instead of buying a brand new car because your old one's turned into a fuel hog, put a streamlined solar panel on the roof and your old car will get the same fuel consumption that it did when its battery was full the day you bought it. So the Australian car industry fell over and died, and nobody wanted to build SunFoils. And there's nothing on the whole SunFoil idea that's patentable. You can't register the design because any panel on any vehicle is going to make an improvement. The difference is that that thing I just showed you back there on the old red Subaru, that took me 30 days worth of tin snippery and pop rivetry and sheet metal work, whereas this Mark 8 takes 1 day. 1 day to modify the panel so it can vent the otherwise accumulated heat when it's sitting in the car park going nowhere, and solar panels really hate getting hot, and mount it with airflow tip fences, flow vanes, parallel to the roof of the car, so that you get very little aerodynamic drag off the front because the air stacks up in a hemispherical high pressure wave, a standing wave, stealth aerodynamics leading edge, while your hot air drain holes take the high pressure air that would otherwise be piling up in front of the rear frame and inject it into the otherwise low pressure area, which would be creating drag around here. And this row of holes injects high pressure air into there, so you get a completely invisible stealth barometric trailing edge. So 30 times faster and easier to build, just as cunning as the Mark III. And why am I telling you this, and why am I so pleased? Well, it's because, dear viewers, you can now buy a SunFoil in a shop from a car dealer, made at the factory, fitted at the factory. I learned about this yesterday when I opened last week's New Scientist and started reading. I don't know whether they're calling it a SunFoil. I don't know whether it is a flat, rigid, rectangular prism of a panel in the old style mounted above the roof, or whether it's a amorphous silicon flexible panel that's built onto the roof and conforming to the curvature of the car. I don't know. But the point is, you can now buy a brand new car that has a solar panel to charge its battery because it saves fuel. So it's only taken the rest of the world 10, 11 years to catch up to the fool on the hill. I'll show you the New Scientist article, otherwise you're going to think I'm full of shit, aren't you? Everybody thought I was full of shit when I first started talking SunFoils. New Scientist, 17th of August 2019. On the News Insight double page, which starts on 20 and comes over to 21. Working hypothesis, sorting the week's supernovae from the absolute zeros. Solar! It's a sunroof, just not as you know it. Hyundai has unveiled a car with solar panels on its roof that will help charge its batteries. You can get SunFoils now, 1 day, every day. Hyundai! 29th of the 11th, 2008, Mark 1 SunFoil fitted. 360 kilometres for the month, 8.75 kilometres per litre, cruising at 90 kilometres per hour. A couple of years later, with the Mark III on the roof, cruising at 100 kilometres per hour, 10.298 kilometres per litre per year. So it saith, dearly beloved, in the book of SunFoil. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Finally, we have won. And I would like to thank everybody who has watched the videos, said nice things on them, supported me, and particularly those people who have taken the plunge, put their money where their mouth was, and bought themselves a solar panel and stuck it on top of their vehicle. There were a few people who claimed that I had my head so far up my backside I must be breathing with a snorkel. Two that come to mind are Gary Mosher of In Mendham channel, who used to live in Mendham, New Jersey, until something happened and he got evicted and he went somewhere else to live. The inventor of ephilism, which is the festeringly fermented version of antinatalism. Okay, Gary couldn't understand SunFoils and he decided to do his best to discredit them. The other individual who did his best to discredit them was Dr. Carl Gary, the Julius Sumner Miller Professor for Science and Education at Sydney University, New South Wales University, one of the two. Back in the 1980s, he tried this idea and he couldn't make it work. And he's spent 35 years telling everybody that there's no point putting solar panels on the roof of a car because it doesn't work, because Carl Gary couldn't make it work. And when I tried to get in touch with him and tell him about my results, we had several disagreeable conversations, and he went around telling everybody that I was full of hot air and hogwash and I was all wrong and it didn't work, and Toyota had tried it and they couldn't make it work, so therefore Warbles on a lot must be wrong. Well, suck eggs, Dr. Carl, because Hyundai is selling them in the shops now. And if you hadn't have done everything you could to block the bloody idea, it would have been available 10 years ago. And how much fossil fuel would we have saved, and how many emissions would we have not farted if every car for the past 10 years had a solar panel on the roof to save, 5% to 30% of its fuel burn, depending on the driving regime, the electrical system, and a few other variables. Moot question now, isn't it? I always figured that around about the time you couldn't buy petrol, that's when people would decide that a SunFoil's a good idea. And of course, Scott Morrison and Trumpy are fixing to have a war in the Gulf of Oman. And Australia's only got a month's worth of refined transport fuel on the continent. So as it were foretold within the prophecy, now that it's too late, you can buy a SunFoil because the world has caught on. Yahoo friggin' yippee. Proves that the rest of you 7.7 billion have got a learning curve after all. I was beginning to doubt the hypothesis. I thought television had turned you all into a bunch of helpless ignoramuses. But apparently not so, not so. Humans are capable of copying a good idea if it's just held up in front of them for 10 friggin' years. Who'd have thunk it? Shit, oh dear. That little speck up there is a 3,000 horsepower turbine engine thrush. It's a crop duster. I use them for fire bombers. I wonder who's on fire. And of course, I probably shouldn't whinge too much. I think there are about 25 SunFoils getting around my hometown because not everybody's too stupid to copy a good idea when they see it driving past. So that's good. Arr. And to think that when I began sending out the information packages back in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, I thought that within 2 years it would be part of the road regulations that you had to have a SunFoil in order to pass your registration exams. That's the definition of optimism, isn't it? The idea that ordinary people would rush to embrace a good idea because it works. Such is life. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.